Hello, I'm Chandu Nair, handling the course on marketing management. We are now going to talk about a very interesting subject, the subject of advertising management. Anywhere we go today, anywhere we are, whether at home or outside, we are bombarded by advertising messages all across the place, whether it is when we are traveling, whether we are sitting and watching television, listening to the radio, going and watching a cricket match, or what have you. We are bombarded by advertising. Even when we go to a religious place, I don't think we are immune from the effects of advertising. So this is something that's all pervasive, and everybody has an opinion, not just on advertising and the advertisements, but also on how it should be done. So let's have a look at what we're going to learn today. First and foremost, we'll understand what we mean by advertising and why is it important. Typically, the objective, scope and functions of advertising. To some extent, we'll also debate and discuss the influence of advertising on society, because there are a lot of people who believe that it is pernicious, it is harmful, it's not really required. And there's equally another bunch of people who think that yes, advertising is required, it's what really helps a lot of buyers and also society in making up their mind and in also influencing their choices. What are the various decisions involved in deciding on an advertising campaign, and the emergence of the internet and interactive advertising. Now, it's very vital that you look at this subject and try to also be a little more objective, because like I said, the temptation to give in to one's opinions is very high. But we are professionals first, we are marketing professionals first, and it's sometimes good for us to keep aside some of our biases and figure out what it is that is happening out there in the marketplace with our consumers, what the competition is doing, how exactly is the regulatory environment, and so on and so forth. So take it in that spirit. So let's look at what exactly is advertising all about. Typically, advertising has been defined as a mass, non-personal, paid form of communication used to build awareness, transmit information, develop attitudes, and induce some form of response, both communication response and a sales response from the target audience. Now, it's very important to understand where this word came from, because that gives you an idea of what exactly is behind it all. It actually is derived from the Latin word advertare, which means to turn the mind to. So really looking at it, it is something that we are trying to play a role by influencing somebody's mind in some fashion. Now, as I've said before, it is the most visible and observable phase of marketing, given its all pervasive nature today. Therefore, people are entitled to have their opinions, and they do. So, when we are looking at advertising, what is it that's important to us? It's important for us to decide who are we targeting this message to. So, the target audience, again and again you will see this word, this phrase called target audience coming up. So, it's important for us to recognize who we want to send a message to. What is it that we want to achieve in terms of a response, whether it's a communication response or an action response by way of sales. And third important thing is, what exactly do we want to send across as the message? Okay, and this all operates in a certain context. As we might have seen in the marketing, integrated marketing communications chapter, there are typically these three elements in a context which is called the general noise. So it's important for us to relate, to understand that this operates within a certain context. So if you look at it, the typical advertising communication process is as follows, that you have a source from which you get various inputs. There is this message, that message is encoded or put in a fashion so that it is better received by the respondent. There is a certain medium through which it is sent. It reaches a particular audience who decodes that message based on their background, their biases, what exactly is the other messages they have received, and then therefore they also figure out how they want to respond. Their response could be typically like we've seen in the classic AIDA model, whether the intended response is to create awareness or to provoke some interest or to make them act and purchase your product. And there is the feedback loop, hopefully, that is established by the sender. Please remember, this plays a key role, because sometimes if there's too much of noise, there's too much of interference, the message may not go through in the manner that it is intended, or it may not go to the right audience. and it may not achieve the desired objectives. So it's important for us to keep this framework in mind while figuring out what exactly we want to do with advertising. Let's go back to some basics again. As we have seen again and again, it's important for us to know who we want to talk to, which is the target audience. There are many bases we have seen for segmentation, and it's important for us to bring those lessons back here again. Many times we know that audiences are identified by their behavior with respect to risk. There are people who are innovators, who are the first off to try a new thing. There are people who are early adopters, there are people who are the early majority, there are people who are the late majority, and there are people who are laggards. Now, depending on this and also things like the product life cycle, you might want to tailor your message, decide on what you want to achieve as a response, figure out also which medium is the best suited to reach this target audience. The other way of looking at it is the hierarchy of effects model. Now, this is something that we have briefly looked at in the integrated marketing communication chapter, but here it goes a little more detail, and it's not just simple 4 steps IDA, it goes a little more. First and foremost is to figure out at what stage of awareness is the target audience. How, if they are unaware about the product, then they need to have a pretty simple message with the objective of getting name recognition. If the audience has some knowledge, which means your objective is to create some knowledge about the product, it means that the audience is already aware about the product name maybe, but they should also need to understand a little bit more about the product. So that is their key focus. The third is, once the audience knows about the product, how do you ensure that they start liking it? They have a favorable disposition towards the product. The fourth thing is, okay, so what? I still like it, but I must prefer it over other choices. For example, if I'm already aware about the existence of a mobile phone, I already have some amount of knowledge, I already like certain aspects of the mobile phone, but I need to start preferring it over the landline for mobile phones as a category to grow and grow faster. So this means you have to start talking much more about features and show the competitive advantage of what you have. Then is to build some conviction, which is that you not only just prefer it, but you need to really be convinced that this is really the choice for you. And finally, you actually get the person to go ahead and make a purchase, which is a call to action. So as you can see, depending on what we want to achieve, there are different types of messages that one might want to tailor for getting a particular response. Therefore, the response is broadly of these types. One, that people understand. There's a cognitive response, which is the message is understood and it's considered and it's understood as well. Second is, there is an effective response, which is that it changes some attitude that one has about something. For example, some people might believe today that tooth powder may not be as good as toothpaste. Now, why they have this attitude? Maybe a reason because everybody else is just having toothpaste and not tooth powder. But years ago, people were having tooth powder, and before that people were using other more traditional alternatives. How did all this change? Because of a change in attitude. Thirdly, there is a set of changes in behavior, it brings about some action. So as we can see, each of these things can take a considerable amount of time, because to bring about certain types of changes takes quite a bit of time, and advertising really is about persuasion and bringing about some kind of mind related change, if you saw from the Latin word advertare. As we have seen time and again, what you say and how you say it is very vital to making sure that your objectives are met. So, for example, the message must stress how a particular need is being satisfied, how it benefits the consumer, especially how it is more advantageous vis-a-vis competition, and it must be in a language that the audience understands. It cannot be something which goes way above the audience's heads. And finally, as we have seen again, credibility of the source is very important. It all depends who's saying it. So, for example, if you are seeing a very highly paid, very attractive movie star wearing a very low quality kind of dress, you will never feel that there is a credibility in that message, because there is what we would call a cognitive dissonance between what we know or have an impression about that celebrity and what we know or have an impression about that product or brand.